Good afternoon. I would like to call the June 4th Salina City Commission meeting to order. Would our clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Jennings.
Here.
Commissioner Angel.
Here.
Commissioner Crawford.
Here.
Commissioner Householder.
Here.
Commissioner Shirley.
Here.
At this point in time, all those that are able, would you please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance in a moment of silence?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Today we do not have, first item up is our citizens forum. This is the opportunity for the citizens that would like to offer any input or comments on items that are not found on today's agenda. So anybody that has something that they would like to bring before the commission, this is your opportunity. Please come forward, state your name and your address. Sir.
I'm Jim Brown, General Manager of the Salina Municipal Band, and I live here in Salina at the present time, but I do have a county address. I would first of all like to thank Mr. Mayor and the commission members for taking the time to look at a budget and to pass funding for the Salina Municipal Band once again this year. We are entering our 128th year as an organized band in Salina, and we have received funding for a good portion of that time from the city and city commissioners like yourselves. I would like to invite anyone in this room, as well as yourselves, to please come to our band concerts this summer. We begin 7:30 p.m. on Tuesday evenings, and we are going to be offering a chance for the public to listen to and hear the Junior Law Enforcement Band, which was organized in 2009 as a part of the Salina Arts and Humanities Horizons program. They have been award-winning bands since the beginning of their, since 2009. They've gone to Kansas City twice and has won first division awards in their competition. They went to Denver, Colorado last year and won a first division award in their competition. They've also been invited in the year 2013 to attend an international band festival in Chicago, Illinois. And so throughout this summer, the Junior Law Enforcement Band will be doing some solicitation of funds through fundraisings and various things at some of the municipal band concerts. And I wanted to let you know and to invite you to attend those concerts if possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Casey Hayden, 2255 Sherwood Lane here in Salina, and I just wanted to make my concerns known to the commission regarding the fluoridation issue. I know the commission's been presented with quite a bit of concise information that is referenced and sourced. It's verifiable. Most of the information comes from the federal government and the FDA and the Environmental Protection Agency. There are a whole host of other pieces of information, again, all sourced. I would encourage you guys to all study that and look at it. I've heard a lot of compelling arguments to stop doing it. Haven't heard a lot of compelling arguments for it, other than we've always done it. It's tradition. It's a lot easier to do nothing, and it makes your teeth strong. And for me, that's not a good enough reason. I do live here. I will be here every week, and I look forward to you guys taking action. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other citizens? Okay, we'll move on. Today we do not have any awards and proclamations, so we'll move on to public hearings and items scheduled for a certain time.
Item 5.1, public hearing and report on petition number 4345, requesting vacation of the south 14 feet of the north 48 feet of Lot 3, Block 5 of Country Oak Estates Edition. Item 5.1A, first reading, ordinance number 12-10641.
We'll open the public hearing on this matter, and we have Dean Andrews. Mr. Hendrick.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. This is a petition that's filed by Sean A. Van Meter, and the location of the property we're talking about is 3126 Marcella Drive in Salina, and that's located in what is known as the Country Oaks Estates Addition or subdivision, and that is located at the southwest corner of the interchange of Schilling Road and I-135. And the original development and platting of this area dates back to 1989, and at the time that the plat was proposed, it was recognized by the Planning Commission that there was no way for children who lived there to get to Schilling Elementary School. And the bridge that was in place at the time on Schilling Road did not have a sidewalk, and the replacement plan for that bridge also did not include a sidewalk, so there was a requirement as a condition of that plat being approved that the developers provide a connection by pedestrian bridge across Dry Creek to the elementary school. And there were a number of delays, about a 10-year delay from that condition being imposed to the bridge actually getting built. And that original bridge that was put in by the developers has since been replaced, and the replacement is the former Hageman School overpass. And so this is not the original bridge that was put in, but this was relocated there when the pedestrian crossing over Broadway was removed that accessed the Hageman School, which is since closed. After the sidewalk and pedestrian bridge improvements were completed, there was still some concern by staff about the long-term viability of its maintenance, and efforts towards creating a homeowners association to take care of it weren't moving forward. So in 2002, this property was deeded over to the city of Salina, and that included the north 48 feet of Lot 3, and that is all right-of-way. And in addition to that, the John, if you could go back to the overall map. This is right-of-way already for the creek channel, and then this shaded area is all owned by the city of Salina and was deeded to us by the developers of Country Oak Estates. So what we're talking about today is a 48-foot wide strip here on Lot 3 that's part of that 2002 dedication. And the petitioner wishes to acquire a portion of that next to the northwest corner of his property. And so to get your bearings, on the right-hand side is Marcella Drive. This is the sidewalk, and the creek is back over in this direction. And the petitioner believes the right-of-way is wider than it needs to be for just a pedestrian sidewalk. And because this was dedicated as right-of-way, the city can't simply sell or deed a portion it over to Mr. Van Meter, but this petition process had to be used. And so we have completed our research. We have contacted local utility providers. There's a storm sewer north of the sidewalk. There are no utilities south of the sidewalk. On general principle, the city engineering and utilities departments both object to vacation of any part of this right-of-way because they want to keep a corridor open between Marcella Drive and over to Schilling School in case there was a need for any future extensions. But basically, you can see from the view here, this gets you from Marcella over to the school. There's also a sidewalk at the south end of this cul-de-sac on Stone Creek, and that comes down here and intersects, and that's how children walk and bicycle to school. So in this particular case, one option would be to retain the whole thing as a utility easement, which would protect the city's interest in a corridor, but that may not be consistent with Mr. Van Meter's interest if it does include building any kind of a building. So I think the most important thing today would be for the petitioner to clarify what his intended use of this property is and what the justification would be for the city giving it up, because it's not necessarily viewed as surplus by the city staff, but 48 feet is wider than what would be needed for a standard utility easement. So with that, I'd be open to any questions you have, but Mr. Van Meter is here to explain his request.
Any questions of staff at this time?
Is that the Van Meter property right there on the left?
Yes, right. And they have a fence line here, and that's their property line, and from here to here is the 48-foot strip that's owned by the city. And what he's requesting is that this line move 14 feet to the north and that be vacated and revert back to his property.
Is it the same width on the north and south side right now, or is it wider on the Van Meter side?
The sidewalk's pretty well centered in that 48 feet. But there's a storm sewer that runs through here north of that sidewalk, but there's nothing presently in there. But it is one of the few areas where you can get from the west side of the creek to the east side in terms of not only for pedestrians, but also for utilities.
What would a standard utility easement need to be?
Standard utility easement would be 20 feet in width, and this whole corridor there is 48 feet in width.
Do you know offhand what the, is there any easement for the sidewalk that comes off the cul-de-sac, or is that just part of the properties over there?
John, if you could go back to that overall
Yeah.
map. This right here is also part of the right-of-way for Dry Creek, so that's actually public property owned by the city of Salina that it's located on.
Okay.
I said all that entire channel for West Dry Creek, the city owns that as drainage right-of-way.
Any other questions?
Mayor, if I
Mr.
could,
Gage.
a couple things. I guess one thing is, generally speaking, when you have property as part of the public domain, you generally look at wanting to retain as much as you can on the thought that you may not know what the future holds. But with that said, I would ask, because I recognize in here that the Public Works and Engineering have indicated that they would like to see the easement retained, and so of that width. And so I would ask maybe Mike Frazier, Mike, what type of project could you possibly foresee in the future that would take more width than we would generally keep for utility easement in that area? I'm not sure what to visualize there.
Yeah, the only thing that I can think of that we might have some need for, if we need to get into that channel to do any repairs or bank stabilization, then you'd need to be able to bring in a track hoe or equipment to that location. If you're going to do something to the bridge, or if they're going to change the bridge to some other type of structure, you need to be able to bring in heavy equipment to be able to access the bridge or the channel.
Okay. Is that a situation in which you would need to access from either side of the drainage channel? Because I'm presuming you could access it from the west side.
You could access it from either side.
Okay.
If you were, when the bridge was done, was that probably craned from both sides?
We did do that because of the structure was in one piece, and that we had to access it from both sides.
Okay.
Now, it doesn't mean in the future that would be necessary, but because this was one section, is that we did have to do that.
Any other questions?
Be available for further questions after you hear from Mr. Van Meter.
Thank you, Mr. Ender. So at this time, do we have any public comment on this matter? Go ahead and state your name and your address, please, sir.
Lynn Van Meter, 3126 Marcella. My son owns that, and he lives in Olathe. The picture you have, that bridge is pretty outdated. It don't have that metal over the top of it anymore. And the kids have, I moved here on December 18th, 2010, and I think the kids have tried to burn that bridge up 4 times. The last time was a pretty good fire. We would like to extend our property line 14 foot north, feeling that 34 feet is plenty of right-of-way for any heavy construction equipment to get down, for them to do anything. Sorry, I don't remember the name of the company. They were in there with big trucks and everything and did some tree trimming here earlier this year, I believe it was, and they had no problems getting in and out, and they didn't even get close to my property line. The reason we'd like to have it is I would like to build a shop in the backyard. I do woodworking, and my garage, I have a path everywhere I want to go. I just don't have enough room, and I need just a little bit more square footage to give me enough extra that I wouldn't be really pushing my limit. As I think the map's not up there, but it showed a yellow strip of land, and they showed another red one off to the side. That was like an A plus B. When I was talking to Dean, I told him, I said, if the city wanted to take the 10 foot and just follow right on around on the sidewalk, or whether they wanted to make just a rectangular piece, I didn't care.
Does anybody have any questions of the intended use or the proposal? Do you have anything further, sir?
No, sir, that's all I have.
Sorry, actually, I do real quick. So your thought is by gaining this extra square footage, it gives you enough space where if you put your shed in, you're not covering your lot too much to make it legal.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
But where do you intend to put the shop on the lot?
It would, okay, there is a 20-foot easement from my back fence forward into the yard. I have enough room between my house and that easement that I can put a 16-foot wide shed, 32-foot long, and shift it just a little bit north, which would put it over into the new area slightly.
Okay, just slightly into that new area.
Yes.
My concern is I don't want it too close to the sidewalk. There would be my thought. but-
Oh, no.
Yeah, you're-
No, I intend to stay at, I don't know, somewhere between 6 and 10 feet from my fence.
I got you.
Do you have an approximate size of the shop that you're looking at putting in?
16 by 32, 16 to 17 foot tall at the peak.
Does it get us anywhere if we reduce the width to what our standard easement width is, as opposed to, I think we're at 48 feet now? Would that make everyone happy? Would you be able to get your building on it, and then we'd still retain the standard easement?
I would think the concern is driving the trucks over the sewage line is that kind of, I understand where Samantha's coming from. She's saying 24 on each side seems a bit large.
Well, the part of the concern would be is the, with the heavy equipment on the sidewalk, is that you drive over the sidewalk, you probably break that.
Sure.
I'm not exactly sure where the utility lines are. I think they are to the north of that location. So you wouldn't want to necessarily get over there. I think the setup right now is such where it gives us the ability to get equipment in there if we need to get it in there without any particular problems to utilities or the sidewalk.
Yeah, Commissioners, a couple things maybe to think about is that one is just to be clear that, make sure I'm correct with this and see if Dean nods accordingly, is that since this was common area, this was part of what was platted initially. Is that correct? So
Part of a building lot.
okay, so it was not a piece of property that may have been taken from two existing properties for a purpose, and then now we're talking about giving it back. It was never taken from anybody. So what we're talking about is taking public property, making it private property, and actually enhancing. So there's no hardship in place. It's just a question of, do you wish to take public property and enhance the nearby private property? Now, with that in mind, I guess the thing to think about is that if there ever was a foreseeable situation in which we would need that width, and we didn't have it, we'd have to obtain permission. Many times the permission comes with a price, even for temporary permission to work. You would have to pay a reasonable price to a private property owner to obtain that. And if there's a structure there, that becomes much more difficult. So that you get into those kind of things. So part of it, while we're trying to talk about what would we need to do there, sometimes you don't know. And so really the part of the question is there any foreseeable possibility that we would need to access that with the property? And if the answer is yes, if it's given away, you would have to pay for that later, possibly, or just not have access to it because of physical structure in that place. If we know for sure that there's no possible need, ever in perpetuity, because we have to think pretty long term, no harm, no foul at that point. So that's kind of what you have to weigh in that type of request.
Anybody have any further questions for Mr. Van Meter? I can go ahead and let him sit on down if not, so you don't have to stand up there awkwardly for quite a while. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I did fail to present you the alternatives that we had presented for you today, but the first one is if you were receptive to vacating that south 14 feet of this 48-foot strip, then the ordinance that's attached to the blue sheet reflects that. If you'd like to consider other options or dimensions or configurations, you could continue the public hearing on this petition, and you could direct staff to do some additional research or surveying work and come back with you with additional information. Or if you simply wish to retain the existing 48-foot right-of-way as is, there's no reason for us to perform any additional research, and you should make a motion to deny the petition that was filed. So those were the three options that we identified, and if you were to choose option 2 and wanted to request us to provide some clarification or additional information, we would certainly be open to doing that.
Yeah, I suppose for me, the further work that I would like to see is if there's a way that this desired building could be laid in to even see whether the building, he said he would have it a certain way back from the fence, and whether the building can be properly configured on the property, leaving then how much room. If he's asking for 14, but under drastic situations, a fence could be removed and provide another 8 foot or something like that, then that would be a different consideration than just thinking about losing the entire right of way. And then the other one would be anything that could be worked at the same time through legal for any future aspect of accessing through there. In a case, I know what would happen as soon as we had to have access back there, we'd finally have rain again. And then we'd have to remove some fence and we'd tear up somebody's yard and have a citizen that would be angry, but to have those discussions up front, if that would be part of the consideration of the future.
Yeah, I think really if the added land is really merely to allow enough square footage to build that size shed, I'm assuming he's maybe already been in to discuss shed sizes, and if he adds this much square footage, et cetera, well, maybe that's not the case. But by gaining this and then allowing him to build it, I would maybe be in favor of it if we kept as much of the building off that property, didn't fence it in. It's sort of a compromise. We're allowing him to get that property so he can do his building, but we're not going to let him build anything out. So if we need to use it later, we have access to it, sort of a quasi-partnership of public and private, where we always have access to that without having to take down any fence or something along those lines, and just add it to his deed in that way that we would have access in a way where, I mean, is that a possibility? Or basically saying add his by gaining that allows him to build his building, but we don't want him building a fence over it and making us have to remove that later and add expense to us or the city later on.
Could you go back to the site plan, John? What we could do, if you were wanting to continue this hearing, we could come back and we could lay in footprints of what that building would look like in different options of location and configuration, and then develop that on. This is an actual survey of Mr. Van Meter's holdings, and it's this piece right here that's owned by the city, and this is his property line today. So we could lay in a couple options. Now, I was not aware of the dimensions of the building, so we could lay in a 16 by 32 building and show you how that might fit in different configurations, if that was something you wanted to consider.
Well, I don't know if I want the city to have any added expense or time in that regard. Just if it's buildable back there, I would just want as little encroachment into that space as possible. I mean, even including fencing or.
Expanding the size of the lot, therefore it reduces the ratio of the lot coverage with a 16 by 32 garage. Now, 16 by 32 is a pretty large garage.
big.
You're talking about, what, 3-4 stalls. That's pretty big. And so the question, I guess, one of the questions you kind of have then is the purpose of giving this simply to, in essence, allow someone to kind of get around is not the right word because that's not the intent, but to somehow meet the expectations of the zoning code when they don't otherwise.
Yeah, that was my understanding.
Yeah, the only thing that's really unique about this property is that most properties, you've got a shared lot behind you, and your easement in back is usually 10 and 10 or 7 and 7. And so he has a 20-foot strip back here that's got a utility easement that he can't utilize for building, but we could certainly run through some scenarios. I didn't have the 16 by 32 dimension, but we could plug that in, look at setbacks, lot coverage, all of those things, and report something back a little more concrete for you if that was your desire.
And Commissioners, one other aspect when we kind of going back to the question of what if these things were there, let's just say it's a fence, and the property was vacated. Let's say there's not a fence. Let's just say the property was vacated and Mr. Van Meter has that property. And speaking with Mr. Binkson, indicated the underlying property interest, prior property interest, may be a deciding factor in what rights the city may or may not have to access that for, like, a maintenance use or some other use. So if you as a body want to go back and look at this, that's an aspect we'd want to look at. Certainly, if you put a building on it, you might as well throw that one out. But assuming there's no building on or nothing that's significant to get out of the way, we would want to look to see if there is any flexibility with regards to needing to use that for an emergency situation or whatever it might be without having to, in essence, acquire temporary access to it.
Right, that's more the direction that I was thinking, is that as long as we don't improve or build on that, or he doesn't, or any future owner, and he's merely using it to gain square footage, that seems to at least maybe the furthest that I would want to go. I mean, I wouldn't want to give it up and say, go ahead and build a building on there. I definitely wouldn't want to do that, but if something along those lines could be had, that would seem the most agreeable, maybe. So,
If we give up part of the right-of-way while he's coming back up, do we put ourselves in a tough spot should the property owner on the other side of the sidewalk file the same type of petition?
I mean, I don't know that you'd have a necessarily legal precedent. The city attorney could address that, but certainly they would have a means to say, you did it on one side, why won't you do it for me?
Yeah.
And the issue is the same. It would seem in
Right.
fairness to consider, you should consider it.
And that's why the 20-foot question versus a 34-foot question.
Mike Sprague indicated the storm sewer's on the north side, so that may be a differing factor.
Different
Oh,
okay.
okay. Sir?
I was going to say, we'd planned on probably putting about 3 foot of that building over onto that area. Now, if we don't have to, we won't, but that was our intentions if we got it.
Originally.
Yeah. Yeah. We wanted to have enough width we could actually take a vehicle and I could have a garage door back there and pull in there and unload lumber such as that. I have a 2-wheel trailer too. And as far as my neighbors wanting, I doubt it. Because she has a hard enough time. They both work odd hours and she has a heck of a time keeping that yard up. I don't think she wants any more.
Well, and we have to think down the road.
But you have
though.
to think down the road,
Yeah,
yes.
not just her. Yeah, it could be the next guy. But I think that Mike brings up a good point, and that storm sewer may change that anyway.
Okay.
Thank you. Is there further discussion or questions on the matter?
Well, just maybe it's worth sending back to go ahead and have them do some layout and see if we could. I mean, if everybody is even interested in doing this, but my take would be, again, if we could let him use it and protect the city's use interests adequately and still allow him to build, I would maybe be in support of going that far.
Sounds vaguely like option 2.
Yeah. Yes, it does.
Mayor, can I come back up just for a second?
Yes, sir.
We would be willing to grant the city, if they needed to have the ground to get heavy equipment in, we would be willing to grant the city permission to do that upon, give us adequate time, to prepare for it. But I don't see anything wrong with that.
Okay, thank you. I think those were some of the considerations that I spoke of earlier, wanting to make sure that legal could consider if it were to go back to building services to look at it further. So I'd entertain a motion at this point in time.
I'd move that we use option 2 on ordinance number 12-10641 and send back to the city staff to have them look over some other options of how maybe we could lay that building out and still retain some city right-of-way.
Second.
Commissioners, before you go too much further, could you go ahead and I think assume they could just modify to go ahead and continue the public hearing to the date and with those tasks in mind, to whichever date you'd want to bring that back to us.
Oh, add the date, when it back. What's staff need? What do you think?
Anything great?
You can get with Mr. Van Meter and
Do it within a week or 2 weeks, whatever you desire.
a couple of weeks give you time to
Yeah.
really.
21st.
21st?
That'd be fine. Thank
Okay,
you.
so just add that we'd bring it back before us on June 21st.
Yeah, because your action is really to postpone the meeting to that date, and then the task list is kind of well stated.
Sure,
So,
okay,
Yep.
sure.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll just make that motion to postpone it in June,
Mike has his calendar out. He said the 18th is.
the 18th,
Monday.
okay, June 18th, okay?
Just to be abundantly clear, if I may, also, Mayor and Commissioners, I think the other point that Mr. Gage was making that I do think, and I'm looking to Mr. Andrew, it would probably be best to keep the public hearing open until that time as well.
Yes.
That was the other aspect.
Do we need to state that in the motion?
Well, I think if you want to just make that
And keep
point.
the public forum open
There you
until
go.
that date.
That's correct.
Okay.
Thanks.
So we have a motion and a second. The motion would be to extend the public hearing until June the 18th, during which time staff would review the matter for potential building layouts and any legal aspects required for future city access to the property, and bring it back before the commission on the 21st.
18th.
18th. Yeah, I did that twice now. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries 5-0. We move on to the consent agenda.
Item 6.1, approve the minutes of May 21st, 2012.
Mayor, I move we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Motion and second to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries 5-0. We're on to development business.
Item 7.1, first reading, ordinance number 12-10640, requesting an amendment of Article 10 signs by adding section 42-518.2 P district to the city's sign regulations.
Mr. Andrew, seems like we have action on signs at least once a year, don't we?
Well, this is something ongoing, that if you're going to have a public use district and you're going to rezone property throughout the city for public use, you have to have sign rules in place for that, and the Planning Commission has been working through that issue. And I think, to summarize it in a nutshell, that the two primary changes from a public use standpoint of signs for what we've been attempting to do, which is apply residential limitations to public uses. The exceptions that they created, one would allow for pole signs at some public uses if you were on an arterial street or if you were a public arena or stadium. The other aspect was we had a very limited exception that allowed only the Salina Bicentennial Center to have off-premise advertising, and that wasn't available to other types of signage, and that's not equitable or very defensible. So basically, that limitation would also be eliminated. I think John has some just some quick examples here, but if you would visualize, if you will, South High School campus on Magnolia, which is an arterial street, or the Central High School campus at Crawford, or the Dean Evans Stadium on Markley Road. Under this provision, those types of uses would have the availability to have one pole sign in lieu of a ground sign, and a certain portion of that would be allowed to have electronic changeable copy message, which is very similar to what the Salina Bicentennial Center is doing today. So, for example, South Middle School, which is all on residential streets, they would not be allowed to have a pole sign. But if you were a school on an arterial street, or if you were a public arena or stadium, you would be allowed to have a pole sign limited to 20 feet in height and limited to 64 square feet in total area. So the first step, again, is to have a body of regulations, and then the Planning Commission is currently working on school district properties in terms of changing them. Most of them are zoned residential today. They would become zoned for public use. And so the amendment that comes to you from the Planning Commission makes those specific provisions.
Any questions of staff?
And again, the two distinctions from what you could do today would be the ability to have a pole sign and the ability to have the off-premise advertising beyond just what the Salina Bicentennial Center has.
Mayor, I have one question. That's just, Dean, have we kind of inventoried existing signs to determine if the ordinance would create any legal nonconformities?
This is less restrictive than anything that those schools have today. They're technically limited to ground signs.
Okay.
And so the square footage increases, the setback is reduced, and the ability to have 64 square feet instead of 32 if you're on an arterial street would not make any of the existing signs non-conforming, just provide options for the future.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Andrew, I want to know if you know what that mascot is for Illinois Valley Central. Yeah, is it the ghost?
Phantoms.
Caspers or
Phantoms.
I
Phantoms,
was
that's
guessing
What is
it was
that?
I like
Casper
that.
the Friendly Ghost, but you can use your imagination.
It looks like he's going boo. So it doesn't look very friendly. It's trying to be scary. I wouldn't want to play that team. You know?
Strike fear.
That
in
is
the heart.
there just
Exactly.
for you. If you're driving down Crawford at some point in time, if this is approved, then the school district would be able to have a sign like that available at Central High that would have upcoming events or things of that nature. So we've been trying for years to apply residential sign rules to schools, and it hasn't always worked. So.
With the benefit of
This
Google,
just in.
those are the gray ghosts.
The gray,
Oh,
the gray
thank you,
ghost.
thank you.
Gray ghost.
Wow, scary.
It is.
Yeah.
Thank the Lord for Google.
What do we do before that?
So your options would be to approve the amendment as recommended by the Planning Commission, or make any modifications you think are appropriate, or refer this back for additional study by staff, or decline to make the recommended changes.
Excellent. Any questions of staff? Thank you, Mr. Andrew. Do we have any citizens that wish to comment on this matter? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission for action.
Mayor, I move that we adopt ordinance number 12-10640, application number Z12-1, filed by the Salina City Planning Commission, requesting an amendment of Article 10 signs by adding sections 42-518.2P, public use district, to the city's sign regulations.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve on first reading ordinance number 12-10640. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries 5-0. We move on to administration.
Item 8.1, authorize lease agreements with Salina Regional Health Center to provide emergency and temporary facilities for ongoing operation of the Saline County Health Department.
Mr. Gage.
Mayor and commissioners, we've been working pretty diligently with the Von Gibbons, the director of the health department, and her staff to try to transition them into another facility. And we indicated towards the end of the last week that we would like to have leases in our hands by today. And with great appreciation for Salina Regional Health Center, we do have 2 leases for your consideration. The leases, for the most part, carry the traditional legal information that you would typically have, but we're looking at month-to-month type arrangements. And we have 2 locations because, really, quite honestly, there isn't, at this point, a single location that's perfect for all aspects of the health department operation. One lease is at 625 East North Street. That is suitable for their clinical operations. Many people refer to that building as the former Rima Bakeware building. It's been occupied by other uses, including medical, since that time. The other lease is for a facility located at 148 North Oakdale. This is on what's considered the Penn campus, suited for the health department's administrative operations. As I mentioned, both are month-to-month. Both facilities are leased as is, and I think one of the bigger aspects of this is that Salina Regional Health Center is not charging rent for the use of the facility. They do have a $5,000 deposit to be put in place. It would be returned upon proper execution of the intent of the lease, but they're not charging a rent, and that's a pretty big benefit because, whether it's a year and a half, or 2 years in a transition type situation, that can add up significantly to the taxpayers. So that's a nice thing that they're offering to do. With that said, I know that the Greg, legal counsel, has been more closely involved in actually constructing and reviewing the lease and so forth than I have, and I defer to Greg to see if he has anything he'd like to add. I mean, these are pretty straightforward, to the point leases, but just make sure we're not missing anything of significance.
Thank you, Mr. Gage. Mayor and Commissioners, we could obviously spend as much time as you would like to with these documents, and more than happy to go through them in whatever detail you might wish. I think Mr. Gage has pointed out the primary provisions. You will see, as you might imagine, there are certain aspects related to compliance requirements that are at work with regard to the to Salina Regional, and that's a good bit of the reason for the length of this document. Has to do with matters in terms of the relationship between the health department and the hospital, and that aspect of what is rather involved law, that in talking with Ms. Gibbons, I'm sure as between the hospital and the health department, they'll be able to address any compliance aspects where you have the health department in facilities owned by the hospital. But otherwise, as Mr. Gage indicates, I think you'll find it to be pretty straightforward terms, but happy to go through it in whatever detail you might wish.
Are there any questions of either Mr. Gage or Mr. Bingston at this time?
Mayor, I'm sorry. I suppose I should note if you go to what is one of the final provisions, you will see that there is a disclosure, as was pointed out as you were dealing with the recent conditional use permit. My partner, John Mize, is lead counsel for Salina Regional and was involved in the preparation of these leases. We felt like this was a circumstance where the interests were sufficiently aligned that it did not present a conflict. Mike Montoya, on behalf of the county, has also reviewed the leases and in conversation just this afternoon indicated his approval in the format that you see before you. I should also mention one of the key considerations is, of course, that we address the matter of insurance compliance, and we have been on the phone as recently as just before your meeting. In fact, that's one of the reasons I arrived a little late. We are confident. Ms. Gibbons submitted late Friday to their insurance carriers the drafts of the leases as they existed at that time. We are awaiting a final call from one of the health department's carriers that has both their professional and their general liability coverage as to their absolute concurrence with the terms of the lease. Preliminary indications from anyone involved in that lineup of folks involved, whether it be the agents or the carriers, don't believe that we'll have any problem with the terms of the lease. But that's one final call we're also awaiting is from that particular carrier.
Any other questions of staff? I think first of all, I guess I'd like to thank the hospital for their cooperation on expediting this, helping us out, and definitely for extending the facilities at a $0 lease rate. This is an unfortunate circumstance that we're under, and we are very grateful to all those in the community, and especially Salina Regional Health Center, for the support and assistance they've been giving us. And then I would just offer anyone making a motion might ask that the resolution, a misspelling on the resolution needs to be corrected.
Count.
the K. Needs to be an M.
Oh.
Thank you.
Oh, I thought the county.
I thought you meant county too. That's why
Oh,
I said the count.
on the,
Yeah.
okay, on the blue sheet, yeah.
Looks like on utilities that will be billed $1,875 a month for water, sewage, and electrical. Are we splitting that with the county, or how will that be divided?
Have you had conversations with Mr. Montoya regarding that?
The not that specific aspect in terms of an allocation. I would what prompted that, you have the contrast, and I'm glad you mentioned that, and I'm sorry, I should have pointed that out. There at the Medale Center, for the administrative purposes, that is the whatever is necessary in terms of the space being utilized, and I assume Ms. Gibbons will interrupt me if I misspeak at all here. She's been on the ground, so to speak, as far as how this is going to work. But am I correct that whatever the utilities are, the health department would be responsible for? That would be the sole function occurring in that building. And am I correct that the reason for the distinction with what is known as the REMA building is that you have occupancy of what has been modified to the clinical area within that larger structure? And that was an effort by the hospital to be sure that that the health department was not responsible for utilities relating to anything other than the square footage utilized for clinical purposes. So that was actually in a way, a reduction or a means of trying to isolate just those utilities that are being utilized by the health department for that square footage. Am I correct, Ms. Gibbons, that's what prompted needing to isolate a number, given that partial use of the structure? But my understanding would be that would simply be an expense to the health department and fall within the overall expenses of operation.
Yeah, I guess as a reminder, you're aware, some of the public may not be, that again, the creation of the health department is a joint effort of the city and Saline County, and the current agreement causes us to divide the cost 50-50, excluding the animal control function, which is handled somewhat differently. So it would be anticipated that the cost would be divided 50-50 in accordance with the current agreement.
Okay.
Any other questions, comment? Do we have any public input on this? Bring it back to the commission for further discussion, potential action.
I move we approve resolution number 12-6906 to authorize the mayor to execute lease agreements with Salina Regional Health Center to provide emergency and temporary facilities for ongoing operation of the Salina County Health Department.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve this resolution number 12-6906. On first reading, all those in favor, aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries 5-0. We have no other business at this time. I'll accept one final motion.
I never get this one wrong. A motion to adjourn.
Second.
A motion and a second to adjourn. Those in favor?
Aye.
Have a good night, everyone.